Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be heading to the Himalayas to explore Nepal's really fascinating journey from a monarchy to a multi-party system.
Yeah.
But, and this is really interesting, I think we're not just going to be looking at like the straight politics of it all. We're going to be digging into the corruption that is kind
Well,
of tangled up in this whole transition
yeah.
and how that impacts this landlocked nation.
Yeah, it's a really interesting story. And it's a country that for centuries was ruled by the Shah dynasty. Well, all the grandeur you'd expect from,
Mm.
long-standing monarchy, but things get complicated when the Rana family kind of comes into the picture. They act as these hereditary prime ministers for over a century. So you can imagine there's this power struggle playing out within the ruling structure itself.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we have this monarchy, but with this added layer of the Rana family, how does that then lead to a multi-party system?
Well, King Tribhuvan, a key figure in the Shah dynasty, manages to restore the monarchy's power after this Rana period. But the push for democracy starts gaining momentum, especially culminating in the People's Movement of 1990. And this movement ultimately ushers in a multi-party system, which is a huge step away from absolute monarchy.
That does sound like a positive development.
Hmm.
But as we mentioned earlier, corruption is a major issue in this story. Did that start after the shift to the multi-party system, or was that already an issue before?
Well, it certainly escalated after the shift, I think you see with this new system. You had a diffusion of power, and that created these opportunities for corruption to take root. The transition wasn't smooth, and sadly, many individuals exploited the changing landscape for their own gain. If you look at Nepal's ranking on Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, it paints a pretty stark picture. Out of 180 countries, they're at a dismal 108th, falling behind even other South Asian nations.
Wow, that's pretty low. So we have this transition to the multi-party system, but it seems like corruption quickly became embedded. What were some of the early signs that this was becoming a serious problem?
Well, one example that really stands out is this proposed forgive and forget bill. Can you believe? They actually tried to pass legislation that would limit investigations into corruption. Essentially, it would have given corrupt officials a free pass. This bill, of course, sparked massive outrage, and it highlighted these growing concerns about impunity, where powerful individuals seem to operate above the law.
Wow, that's a pretty bold move to try to just like sweep corruption under the rug like that.
Exactly. And this culture of impunity is a recurring theme that we're going to see in Nepal's story. But to fully understand the depth of the issue, we need to look at the context. The 1990s also saw the rise of the Maoist insurgency. This was a violent conflict, fueled by deep-seated issues like poverty, inequality, and frustration with the government.
So on top of transitioning to this new political system, Nepal is also dealing with an armed conflict. How did this insurgency further complicate things?
Oh, it definitely added fuel to the fire. This decade-long conflict claimed over 14,000 lives
Yeah.
and left the country deeply scarred. The Maoists were fighting for a radical change, like a complete overhaul of the system. They demanded a republican state and a new constitution. So this conflict really exacerbated existing tensions and created further instability, making it even more difficult to establish a strong, corruption-free government.
It sounds like Nepal was facing a perfect storm of challenges. You have this political upheaval, you have a violent insurgency, and this rising tide of corruption. It's hard to imagine how any nation could navigate all of that effectively.
Absolutely. And then in 2001, amidst this already volatile climate, Nepal is struck by a tragedy that sends shockwaves through the nation and beyond, the royal massacre.
This is a turning point, wasn't it? That's the kind of event that would shake any nation to its core.
Oh, absolutely. In a shocking turn of events, Crown Prince Dipendra killed most of his family, including King Birendra, and then took his own life. The details are still shrouded in mystery, and conspiracy theories still circulate today. But the impact on the monarchy's image was devastating. It further eroded public trust in the institutions that were meant to lead the country.
It's like the foundation of their society was crumbling right before their eyes. So how did Nepal even begin to move forward after something so traumatic?
Well, it wasn't easy. King Gyanendra took the throne, but the damage was done. Initially, he tried to stabilize the nation, but later made a very controversial move by consolidating power and becoming an absolute monarch. It was a step backward for the progress towards democracy that had been made.
So they went from a centuries-old monarchy to a multi-party system, back to an absolute monarchy under King Gyanendra. What a roller coaster. How did the people react to this?
There was widespread opposition,
Wow.
as you can imagine. The move was seen as an attempt to cling to power and reverse the democratic gains that had been fought for. This period of instability further exposed the cracks in the system and created more opportunities for corruption to thrive.
So it feels like we're seeing a pattern here. Every time Nepal takes a step towards stability and progress, something happens to pull them back into this cycle of turmoil and corruption. It's heartbreaking to think about the impact this has had on the Nepali people.
It's a tragic situation, no doubt. But to understand the full scope of this corruption, we need to delve into some of the specific scandals that have plagued Nepal, especially in recent years. These cases illustrate how deeply ingrained this issue has become and the devastating consequences it has had on the nation's development.
Okay, let's do it. Let's shed light on these scandals and
Yeah.
see how they connect to this bigger picture of Nepal's struggle for a better future.
Okay, sounds good. Let's start with the Lalita Nuwas land grab case. This is a prime example of how corruption can reach the highest levels of government, even in a nation striving for democracy. This Lalita Nuwas case, it's like something out of a movie. We're talking about prime real estate in Kathmandu, originally owned by the government, that was systematically carved up and handed over to private individuals. So imagine forging documents and making these shady deals to essentially steal land from the state.
So it wasn't just a few corrupt officials cutting corners. This sounds like a coordinated effort involving some pretty powerful players.
You hit the nail on the head. Investigations revealed this complex web of involvement, implicating high-ranking politicians,
Wow.
including former prime ministers, government ministers, top-level bureaucrats. It's a stark reminder that power, if left unchecked, can easily be used for personal gain, even in a democracy.
Yeah, it's almost like the transition to a multi-party system created these new avenues for this kind of corruption to flourish.
Right in. The Lalita Nuwas case really demonstrates how easily traditional power structures, even after a shift to democracy, could be exploited. The public outcry was immense. People were demanding justice and accountability. But as with many corruption cases in Nepal, the wheels of justice turn very slowly. And the question of whether those truly responsible will ever face consequences still remains unanswered.
It's disheartening to hear that. These cases often drag on with little resolution. It makes you wonder if the system itself is part of the problem.
Yeah, that's a valid point. But let's move on to another scandal. That really shook Nepal. The Bhutanese refugee scam, this one is especially disturbing because it preyed on vulnerable people who were already fleeing hardship.
Okay, tell me more about this. How were Bhutanese refugees involved?
Well, that's the catch. They weren't actually Bhutanese refugees. The scam involved luring ordinary Nepali citizens with false promises of resettlement in the United States and other Western countries. They were tricked into believing that they could have a better life abroad if they posed as refugees.
Wow, so imagine being so desperate for a better life that you would fall for a scam like this. That's what these officials were exploiting.
Exactly. And who are the masterminds behind this scheme? Government officials, immigration agents, a whole network of fixers who charged these exorbitant fees for creating fake documents and arranging travel. It was a cynical exploitation of a humanitarian crisis, and the human cost was immense.
It's hard to fathom the level of deception and cruelty involved in something like this.
Thousands of Nepalists were sent abroad fraudulently, generating millions of dollars for those involved. Many ended up stranded in foreign countries, their dreams shattered, and their lives uprooted based on lies.
It's a stark reminder that corruption is more than just financial gain. It's about shattered lives and the erosion of trust. And speaking of financial gain, let's talk about the gold smuggling scandals. These have been in the headlines for years. How do they fit into this bigger picture of corruption in Nepal?
Oh, the gold smuggling scandals are a prime example of how corruption can undermine a nation's economy and security. We're talking about kilograms, sometimes even tons of gold, brought into the country illegally. It's a sophisticated operation involving bribed customs officials, fake documents, exploiting loopholes in the system.
Sounds like a scene out of a spy thriller with like secret routes and suitcases full of gold bars.
Not far off. There are several layers to this. First, it's about simple economics. Gold is a very valuable commodity in Nepal, both for personal use and as a form of investment. Smugglers capitalize on this demand. They create an illicit market, and they profit from the price differences between countries.
So they're essentially creating this underground economy based on this illegal trade. But you mentioned there's a darker side to this as well.
Right. Some investigations have revealed links between gold smuggling and other criminal activities like money laundering and even terrorism financing.
So this goes beyond just economic gain. It sounds like it could have serious implications for Nepal's stability and security.
Exactly. These smuggling operations can destabilize the country, undermine the rule of law, and potentially fuel organized crime. And what makes it even more challenging is that these networks often have connections to powerful figures who can use their influence to protect them from prosecution.
We see that pattern of impunity emerging again. But let's bring this back to Nepal's unique challenges as a landlocked nation. We talked about its reliance on trade with India and China. How does corruption further complicate this?
Well, Nepal's landlocked status makes it heavily reliant on its neighbors for almost everything. Trade access to the outside world, you name it. Imagine having to rely on just 2 stores for all your groceries.
Yeah.
And those stores are controlled by people who can demand bribes for access. That's the kind of precarious position Nepal is in.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. It highlights how vulnerable their economy is.
Yeah.
Disruptions or manipulation.
Right, and when you add rampant corruption at border crossings to the mix, it creates even more uncertainty and cost. Imagine businesses having to pay bribes just to get their goods across the border. It adds delays, increases expenses, makes the entire process unpredictable.
It creates a hostile environment for businesses. And it discourages investment, both domestic and foreign. I mean, who wants to put their money into a system where the rules are constantly changing? And you might have to bribe someone just to get things done.
That's the crux of it. It stifles economic growth, and it hinders development. Think about funding allocated for essential projects like roads, schools, hospitals. When that money is siphoned off through corrupt practices, it's a direct blow to the country's progress and the well-being of its people.
Yeah, it's a tragic cycle that keeps the country trapped in this state of underdevelopment. But it's important to remember that every story has 2 sides. We focus a lot on the negative aspects of Nepal's transition. But have there been any positive developments, any signs of hope amidst all of this?
Absolutely. Despite the challenges, Nepal has made strides toward democracy. And there are dedicated individuals and organizations working tirelessly to combat corruption and promote good governance.
That's encouraging. It's important to acknowledge the people who are fighting for a better future. What are some concrete examples of these positive developments? What gives you hope that Nepal can overcome these challenges?
Well, one encouraging sign is the growing awareness of the problem. People are fed up with corruption and are demanding accountability. They're no longer willing to tolerate it as just a fact of life. And this shift in public perception is crucial for creating lasting change.
That makes sense. I mean, people power can be a really powerful force for change. What about the role of the media? We've talked about how a free press is vital for holding those in power accountable. Have you seen any progress in that area?
Definitely. Despite facing pressure and even threats, the media in Nepal is becoming increasingly vocal in exposing corruption. Investigative journalism is on the rise, and online platforms and citizen journalists are playing a key role in amplifying these voices and holding those responsible to account.
That's great. It's inspiring to see people using their voices and platforms to fight for transparency and accountability. But what about the institutions themselves? Have there been any positive changes within the government or anti-corruption agencies?
There have been some promising developments. Anti-corruption agencies, like the Commission for the Investigation of Abuse of Authority, or CIAA, have shown a renewed commitment to tackling high-level corruption. We've seen some high-profile cases where individuals have actually been held accountable, which is a step in the right direction.
It's encouraging to hear that these agencies are stepping up and taking action. It sounds like Nepal's is at a crossroads. They've faced immense challenges during this transition, but there are also signs that they're moving towards a more transparent and accountable system.
You summed it up perfectly. Nepal's future hinges on the choices that they make now. It's about strengthening democratic institutions, empowering citizens, and fostering a culture where corruption is simply unacceptable. It's a long and complex process. But I believe they have the potential to create a brighter future.
I agree. And it's a reminder that the fight against corruption isn't just a Nepalese issue, it's a global challenge that requires a united front. We all have a role to play in demanding transparency and accountability, both in our own communities and on the world stage.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the intricacies of Nepal's transition to the devastating impacts of corruption and the glimmers of hope that are emerging.
Yeah, it's been a heavy but incredibly insightful journey. We've learned about the challenges of political and economic transitions, the devastating effects of corruption, and the importance of a free press and an active citizenry in holding power accountable.
We hope this deep dive has provided you with a deeper understanding of these complex issues and inspired you to learn more. The fight for a just and equitable world continues, and it's a fight we must all be a part of.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep